We just had the official reveal stream for the 2024 Player's Handbook, and we got a lot of good stuff to dive into, so let's not waste any time. The reveal video itself was over an hour long, so I'm going to try and cover everything that they did in a much more condensed fashion, but also still provide some of my thoughts and maybe some insights about everything. Also, I'm going to be trying to keep up and get out as much content as possible about everything being revealed over the coming weeks, so if you want to help me reach that goal of 10,000 subscribers by the time the revised PHB comes out in September, and so you don't miss any of my coverage, a sub to the channel would really mean a lot. Thanks. Firstly, they led with their design philosophy, and I think that that's a great place to start since it helps inform a lot of the decisions that they made for the upcoming revision. Jeremy Crawford mentioned that it was their intent to streamline as much as possible, while also trying to make it easier than ever before to engage with the game, while also making it deeper and to provide more tactical options. While we still obviously don't have all of these specifics, this is exactly the kind of thing that I wanted to hear from them. I think something that often gets conflated is complexity and depth. I've spoken about this before on the channel, but you've seen this sentiment everywhere on YouTube and Reddit or anywhere else that people often just want more systems, more mechanics, and more stuff. Because there's this prevailing thought that having more stuff to do makes for a better or a more deep and rewarding experience at the table. This, though, is not necessarily the case at all. It isn't hard to just add new things to do. The design team can add in 37 new mechanics tomorrow if they really wanted to. But what is really hard to do, particularly from a design perspective, is to add new and meaningful and valuable mechanics or other systems into the game. If you're going to ask your players to invest the time into learning something, whether that's just a simple rule or a brand new system like Bastions, you want there to be value returned to the player for their effort. If the mechanic you're adding is just busy work and doesn't fundamentally improve or emphasize elements of the game that you want it to, it's probably better off just not having that thing. When it comes to TTRPG rules, more is not always better. This leads nicely into the discussion of weapon masteries, which they spent a considerable amount of time on. The mechanical implementation of weapon masteries doesn't seem like it's been massively changed since the reveals and minor tweaks that occurred over the course of the UA. I've been critical of the implementation of the weapon mastery system in the past. I've mentioned that I would have preferred a system where the masteries themselves were tied to the characters rather than the weapons. However, over time and after seeing a lot of the implementations of various other new TTRPGs in the space, I've grown to appreciate what weapon masteries bring to the table. Which is to say that they have brought a true differentiator between the different pieces of equipment in the game that both fits a desired aesthetic and also gives a legitimate reason to use one otherwise identical weapon over another. Though I won't go into full detail on it here, as I do have another video all about it. For those that don't know, weapon masteries give a character that have access to them through either a class feature or a feat that they can pick while leveling up. It gives them the ability to use weapons in new and unique ways that transform the way that they perform in combat. And importantly, if a character that does not have the weapon mastery feature uses the weapon, they don't get access to the mastery property that's tied to it. Something that's important to note is that just because you might have access to weapon masteries through the feature, it doesn't mean that you have access to all masteries on every weapon. Your character will begin with access to a small amount of masteries and will unlock more as they continue to level up, and you'll be able to change the ones that you have prepared during a long rest. This was always part of the element that I took issue with, as it doesn't make a lot of sense that you just kinda forget how to use the mastery. But I guess in a game with dragons and fireballs, we can suspend our disbelief about this. The in-game justification that they use is that you're spending time practicing the new drills, which would hone in your skill on those over another. The interesting thing to me about weapon masteries, though, is the very difficult design balancing act that they had to go on. Because they can be used on every single attack without the expenditure of any additional resource, they had to be designed in a way that would be simultaneously impactful, not slow the game down, but also not be overpowered if stacked together, which is also a big part of why they are not particularly mechanically heavy. It really shouldn't be understated just how tricky of a balance this is to strike, especially given their design direction. They could have made them usable once per round or something, but then the pace of the game could suffer as you'd always be wondering when the perfect time to use them is, and they would also likely be much more involved and mechanically complex, which both combine to an end result that has combat slowed down to much more than it probably should have to. Again, this was an intentional design decision. They opted to have weapon masteries function in this way in a direct effort to achieve the goal of simplicity during play, but to also add impact and depth to item selection. Some may not like this or feel like it isn't rich enough. Others might love it, but in any case, this is the direction that they went with. There's been a bunch of rule changes that were revealed too, but before we get there, let's look at some of the updates to character creation. Jeremy Crawford stated that they view backgrounds and your species as two halves of the same whole. They're designed to work together and to interlock to truly help define the character that you want to play. They have this vision of, and this is how the chapter is structured, that you'll begin with your class, probably the most important decision that you will make during character creation. Then you'll take a step back and figure out how you arrived at being part of that class, and that's where your background comes into play. And finally, you'll go back in time even farther to the moment of your birth and determine your species. One fundamental change that they've made with this revision is that ability score increases are associated with your background rather than your species, or what was known before as race. This to me honestly makes so much more sense, and I've been in favor of it since they revealed the concept back in the first Unearthed Arcana. Tying ability score increases to your background is much more indicative of the types of things that you would be good at, and also makes your background a much more important element of your character design than it was in the past. One tweak they've made since the first UA is that previously, each background gave you a fixed ability score that would increase when you selected it. Now, each of the 16 backgrounds in the book will have 3 ability scores tied to it. The guide, for example, will have Dexterity, Constitution, and Wisdom. You can then choose whether to give +2 to one ability, and then which of the remaining 2 will get a +1. Or you can instead opt to give a +1 to each ability. This additional flexibility helps to reconcile some of the design decisions made with the updates from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that so many people loved, but this brings them into the background system. Feats are now a core rule in the game. Previously, feats were technically an optional rule, and according to Jeremy Crawford, fewer than 50% of the players engaged with the system. That truly shocks me, but hey, I got nothing else to go by, so I'll take their claim at face value. Now, all species provide what is known as an origin feat, which is to say that you get a feat at first level. These will be a much smaller subset of less powerful feats. You're not going to be able to pick Sentinel or something like that straight out of the gate at first level. Also, it's worth noting that humans will not only get their origin feat, but they will get to choose a second origin feat as part of their species traits, which is still pretty solid. They mentioned in the video that there was also an intentional choice to have species be asymmetrical. Not every species will have the same immediately apparent power level, and nor will they have the same degrees of complexity. Again, this was an intentional choice that was made to be able to provide a wider variety of playstyles and options for players. I also think that this is a great decision. There will always be a quote-unquote best option no matter what they try and design. So as a result, it's likely going to end up working out better for more people if they just create different species and classes and subclasses that all have varying degrees of depth and complexity to suit different playstyles than trying to make everything feel functionally identical. To me, this gives more breathing room for design space and makes things feel far less restricted and allows for more and new background species in the future. They also noted that there will be guidance for players who do want to focus on optimization for particular types of builds or classes, for which skills and abilities to prioritize if they're more interested in that, rather than strictly story and character development. And they'll also provide guidance for starting at higher levels, which they recommend for more advanced players now. Additionally, they also noted that there will be a sidebar in the character creation chapter that explains how to use backgrounds and species that were published in earlier books. It's worth noting that anything from the 2014 PHB has been canonically replaced by what is now in the 2024 PHB. So effectively, they're saying not to play a 2014 Dragonborn or human anymore. But they will provide instructions for how to import one of the backgrounds from another book, like Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, or anything like that that didn't appear in the 2014 PHB and isn't in the new one either. One final note on feats are that fighting styles have been folded into the feat system rather than existing within the classes themselves. This will help to explain why there are now 75 feats in the new Player's Handbook, which is like double what they had before. This combined with the fact that epic boons are also still in the game and have been moved into the feat system and are now unlocked at level 19, which makes them marginally more likely to be used than they were before. Regardless though, there are still new feats, and the ones that have been carried forward have also been revised. Those are probably some of the biggest changes that have been revealed so far, so now let's look at some of the smaller scale ones, or the ones that we don't really know as much about yet. Stat blocks. We got confirmation that stat blocks themselves have been redesigned to be both easier to use and ensure that all creatures are appropriately hitting their CR. We knew that there would be some adjustments to most, if not all, of the monsters in the game, but it's nice to see that there will be some design improvements made along with that. I wonder if they'll take some of my suggestions. It's unlikely, but hey, who knows. The new PHB will also have a much larger creature appendix than the 2014 book did. It will include a strong selection of wild-shaped creatures for druids, the stat blocks for summoning spells, which have also all been adjusted, all mount options, and familiar options as well. I have talked a lot on this channel about the monster manual and stat blocks, so I've got to admit, I am perhaps overly excited to see what the new design will look like and how the new creatures will feel to run and battle against. Potions are officially now a bonus action to consume. This was probably the most commonly used house rule, and for good reason. This also speaks to the larger trend that we have seen throughout the Unearthed Arcana process, that the team is trying to make healing a much more accessible and overall just better thing, which I am a big fan of. Bardic Inspiration has also been revised, and it isn't any of the options that we saw in the UAs. And honestly, good. I really didn't like the reaction versions of it that we saw. It always felt a bit out of place. The feature is now called Heroic Inspiration and has been redesigned to play better with the game and be more impactful. Inspiration no longer provides advantage. They recognize that there's already so many ways to grant advantage that having a class feature entirely dedicated to it and providing a restricted version of it could probably be done a little bit better. As a result, Heroic Inspiration now grants a reroll, not advantage, a full reroll that can stack with advantage from another source that you can use on any die roll. Whether it's an attack roll, a saving throw, damage dice, healing roll, healing from a hit die, whatever die you're rolling, it doesn't matter. Heroic Inspiration from the Bard now lets you re-roll that die. Though we don't have full details on this yet and how exactly it mechanically works, I gotta say that I love this move. Everyone has asked at least once, can I use this for my damage? And the answer has always been no, but finally, not anymore. The book contains over 400 spells, many of which have been rewritten to be more clear or improved or adjusted in one way or another, and there's also some new ones, though we have essentially zero information on this so far. I've been making a series of the worst designed spells in 5e, so I sincerely hope that some of the ones on those lists get some love. New crafting rules have also been implemented. These rules will be split between the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. The PHB will contain new rules for crafting basic potions and some items and small things of that nature, whereas the expanded rules in the DMG will contain rules for crafting of magic items and more advanced things. This has been something that we've all been begging for years, so I am so happy to see this finally being included in the game. The fact that magic item crafting has been relegated to the DMG, which likely means it's something of an optional rule, this can help DMs not necessarily have to deal with that much on the table for their players. This feels like a really good decision to have made. Lastly, for the PHB, they revealed that they wanted to make psionics feel like a true part of the game and not just a tacked on afterthought. This is why the Great Old One Warlock is present, but along with the Soul Knife Rogue, the Psy Warrior Fighter, and the Aberrant Mind Sorcerer. Also, we got confirmation that the College of Dance Bard, the Path of the World Tree Barbarian, and the Circle of the Sea Druid all made it through playtesting and will appear in the book, but we don't know anything about the changes that have been made to them yet. Though there wasn't much, we also got some information about the new Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monster Manual, so let's quickly go over some of that stuff. The DMG has received a complete restructure, praise Vecna. I've been openly critical about how much I want to love the DMG, but I've always found using it to be such a chore. It's so poorly indexed, almost nothing is where you'd expect it to be. Most of the stuff you want to find is buried in the back or under a random sub heading during a seemingly unrelated chapter, but by the sounds of it, that's all been addressed. Chapter 1, instead of thrusting the DM into creating laws and religions for their world, will now focus on the basics of the game and helping to guide a new DM through that process. Chapter 2 will be dedicated to running the game, and Chapter 3 will contain all the stuff that everyone always looked for in the DMG but could never find. Rules on traps and curses and molds and funguses and poisons and all that fun stuff is in this chapter called the DM Toolbox, and it's all been alphabetized to find. This alone has me so excited for the new book. The new DMG will also contain 5 short sample adventures to help new and even veteran DMs get a better handle on what the structure of a campaign can look like, and will also have a complete campaign setting included, that being the world of Greyhawk, contained in the book, which suggests that the default setting for this revision of the game may be Greyhawk, kind of like Forgotten Realms was in 2014 5e. Though they have made distinct moves towards the multiverse in recent years, so I can see that also just being likely to continue. The Bastion system is being carried forward. I've got an entire video dedicated to that if you don't know what it is, so go check it out. There will also be a lore glossary, as well as a chapter entirely about the cosmology of the multiverse, which can help provide people like me who just love to get absorbed in the lore and the mythology of the universe in a simple and direct way to do that. The last big new feature that we learned about is that the DMG will also have multiple new tracking sheets, which are sheets designed to keep track of important game information for your NPCs, your settlements, magic item distribution, important player character information, a session planner, and even a sheet that players can use to keep track of their bastions. This is honestly so cool. Everyone has their notebooks filled with a bunch of random notes on different pages that you're flipping through to find that one thing that player did 14 sessions ago, and now it can all easily be tracked in a convenient sheet that's designed to convey that information to the player and DM alike. This is a very simple addition that I think will go a long way to helping the management of the game. Lastly, on the monster manual, we didn't get any information that we didn't kinda already have. There will be over 500 monsters comprised of both allies and enemies. Every monster from the 2014 book has been rebuilt to ensure that it's actually hitting its intended challenge. And as we mentioned earlier, the stat blocks are also getting a redesign. There will be over 75 new monsters, many of which are designed to fill in families of creatures. They use the example of adding a younger, weaker vampire, as well as a more powerful one, so that these creatures can be more reliably used throughout different portions of the game. I love this move as I've run into this issue multiple times over the years, where I know kinda what creature I want to include, but they don't exist in the right challenge range for my party, and while yeah, I can obviously make any changes that I want to suit the game, the fact that I won't necessarily have to do that myself is so freeing. There will also be more quote-unquote Apex versions of monsters. These are things akin to the Tarrasque or Ancient Dragons that exist at the very top of the challenge range to add additional peril to a campaign and can be even used as plot devices in themselves. There's going to be things like giant oozes, apex hags, and even an elemental juggernaut. Overall, I am so happy with what we've seen so far with the 2024 books. There is still a lot to come and to discuss, so I'll be doing my best to keep up with everything. So if you want to help me in doing so and see all of my coverage, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. Thank you so much, take care.